Welcome to Excelsior 32, the online news source for the Excelsior Project from the New York Council of Deliberation.
Brother Russ Charvonia is the past Grand Master of California in 2014 and 2015, the founder of the Masonic Civility Council, president of the Worldwide Civility Council, a 501c3 nonprofit, a respected and known litigator and mediator. He's also the author of the Civility Mosaic, how anyone can use the principles of Freemasonry to repair our world. You can find that online at civilitymosaic.com or look at his other work at masoniccivity.org. My brothers, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Most Worshipful Russ Charvonia.
Thank you, Peter, but you just couldn't do it, could you? I offered him $20 if he would just introduce me purely as he's a hell of a guy, and he couldn't do it. But you clearly have a voice for radio and a face for TV, and unfortunately, I have neither. So welcome, brethren. It is indeed a pleasure to get to share some time with you about something about which I am incredibly passionate, and that is the firm necessity that we, as members of the Masonic family, not in the name of Masonry, but because we are Masons and because it's the right thing to do, what we can do to do all we can to restore civility to society. So that's what I'm here to talk with you about this evening. And I'm going to get things out of my way so that I can do this properly. And as Bob said, this is only our millionth Zoom of the past 2 years. So we'll make sure that it's all working properly. So there we go. You see my screen and we're in good shape. When I started this effort some almost 8 years ago, when I would talk to people to try to grasp, what is the level of incivility in their lives, I would oftentimes have to prompt them to think about an uncivil interaction that they had had. And over the course of these many years since, I don't have to do that anymore because those examples are unfortunately all too frequent. It happens when we are one-on-one with people. It happens when we're on our roadways. It happens when we're behind the screen of our computers. It happens in our family lives, and unfortunately, it happens in our lodges. It seems to be so prevalent that my big concern here is that this is becoming a habit, that this is becoming such a way of who we are that we're not going to be able to change it. And Kevin's drawing all over my screen here. So in my opinion, we need to do something about this, and we need to do something about it now. And we, in fact, as Masons, are the most well-equipped to do something about it. As Masons, of course, we're taught to seek the light. I'm going to suggest we go even further than that we go towards true enlightenment. Going from darkness to light is one aspect, but Masonry, in my opinion, is all about seeking that true enlightenment. And if you think about it, the United States is built upon many Masonic ideals. It's not an accident that our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, even our Declaration of Independence has Masonic values through and through, because so many of our founding fathers were in fact Masons. And I often think back to those days to the best of my ability, of course, from reading books and so on. They didn't just come together and all agree as to how this country should be formed. They had violent, heated debates and arguments and duels over it, if you think about it. And yet they were able to come back primarily using the Masonic values and Masonic tenets to construct what I think is still the best system of government that humankind has ever seen. For all of its faults, all of its foibles, They designed an incredible system. They were truly enlightened. And I don't think it's hyperbole for us to aim to become as or more enlightened as our founding fathers. We certainly have the intellect, we have the history, we have the ability to communicate. Why can't we? Why can't we lead something that really transforms society for the better? I'll submit to you that it's not a question of why us so much as if not us, then who? I work with a number of different civility organizations, and I'll tell you what, none of them have the scale. None of them have the ability to pull together a group of people together to make as big a difference as we can. So if not us, then who? And I submit to you, it's not going to be anybody. Now, we're going to spend some time together. We're going to invest a good amount of time. Therefore, this time needs to be of value. It needs to be a good investment. So I'm going to challenge you to find 3 nuggets, 3 pieces of information that you can take out of the time we spend together this evening and put to use tomorrow morning when you wake up. Why 3? Well, first of all, it's a great Masonic number. But secondly, the studies show that 3 is about the highest number of things that the human mind can focus on and keep track of at one time. All right, maybe if you're a woman, you can do more than that, but us guys, that's what we're limited to. So look for those 3 nuggets throughout our sessions of things that you feel you can put to use in your life, in your lifestyle to start to repair our world. I mentioned we started this 8 years ago at the Conference of Grand Masters in North America in Baltimore, Maryland. And after that, a group of us formed what we called the Masonic Civility Task Force. And we have met every month since then, religiously. When I stop and think about all that we've accomplished, it's really pretty remarkable. And I'll share some of that with you later on in this presentation. But we thought the first thing that we ought to do is define the word civility. It was just a natural beginning, if you will. And so we spent 4 of those monthly sessions writing and rewriting different definitions. And they were getting there, but they weren't quite fitting the bill. I describe it like we're trying to hold sand in our hands. And after 4 months of this futility, I did what I should have done from the outset, which is what? I Googled it. I typed in the word civility into Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge, and it said the incivility. And it was one of those aha moments. No wonder we're struggling with it. Civility is a word that is easier to describe by what it is not than what it is. In other words, we all know what it isn't. What is civility? Well, over the years, I've had people tell me, it's about being polite, applying the rules of etiquette, being courteous, avoiding the difficult conversations. I've had others tell me it has nothing to do with that. Civility is about being able to engage in difficult conversations, treating people with a basic level of dignity and respect so that you can start to resolve some of the problems that ail society. I think it's a combination of the two, frankly. I don't know how you can have those difficult conversations with somebody if you're not able to respect them. Since it's us brothers here, I'll give you an example of that. Many years ago, a Grand Master from a Southern Grand jurisdiction told me that he would never be seen sitting in lodge with a black man. I was floored by the comment, thought about what to do. And in those, what felt like a minute or two, but it was probably a few seconds, I said, you know what, Most Worshipful, this conversation is over. In those few moments, I asked myself, am I going to have a chance of changing his mind? Am I going to be able to respect him in order to continue the conversation we were having prior to that? And I determined no. And rather than beat him up over what I thought was an abhorrent attitude, I decided to extricate myself from that situation. So there are people with whom I don't believe I can engage in a civil conversation. And when I encounter that, my job is to get out of there, keeping my whole as my presence as whole as possible, and not tearing them down in the meantime. So I hope that definition makes some sense. There is now a definition in Wikipedia. You're on your computers or your tablets, so you have my permission to check it out. That definition is there because of our efforts. In fact, Worshipful Brandon Lippincott from a lodge down near me in Southern California did the lion's share of the work. I don't know if you've ever tried to put anything in a Wikipedia, but they just keep rejecting, hoping you go away. But he was relentless. And if you look there, you will see several references to Freemasonry because of his efforts. We had a lot more, but they cut them out over time. We're still pretty proud of it. So the question is, can we fix this? And I am absolutely confident we can. I will tell you that there have been numerous occasions over the years where I've thought our efforts were in vain, and that I could take my time, money, and effort towards something that might be more fruitful. And about that time, I start getting that attitude in my mind. Somebody will send me an email or call me, and they'll say, Russ, something you shared with me months or years ago helped me in this situation. And that's what keeps me going. Because I do believe we can make a difference. I do believe we can turn it around. Why us? Well, if you look at our 3 principal tenets and our 4 cardinal virtues, they talk about how you behave in order to be a better citizen, a better husband, a better son, a better father, a better employee. Brotherly love, relief, and truth talk about how we are to treat others. And each of those words, to me, springs up the idea of civility. Temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice are more internal, how I am to act towards others. And I believe that if you act with temperance, if you persevere with fortitude, if you're prudent in your judgments, and if you treat others with justice, then you will have a respectful, dignified, civil relationship. This isn't just Masonry. We can spread this out to the entire Masonic family. If you look at, I work a lot with our youth orders. And this does this every time. I don't know why. I thought I had fixed it. Bear with me just a minute here. DeMolay, there's 7 precepts. And I've sat down with DeMolay, Rainbow for Girls, Job's Daughters, and I've talked about their tenets, their principles. And they've been able to line up every one of them with the concept of civility. So it's clear to me that civility it's nothing I dreamed up. It's just an umbrella for who we are and what we do. So the good news is that we have built a civility toolkit. If you have that Snap-on or Craftsman tool chest in your garage, you have a particular project you're working on, something around the house, and maybe plumbing or electrical, or you're working on the car. You go out there, you open the drawer that has the tools for that type of job, and you pull out the particular tools that you may need. Same concept here. If you're encountering incivility in your workplace, in your community, dare I say in your family or in your lodge, there are drawers that you can open up and pick out the particular tools to help you to resolve that problem. And there are well over 1,000 tools in there. I'm going to introduce some of them to you. And to do that, I'm going to first talk about diversity. I think we can all agree that diversity is something that's enviable, something that's worthwhile. A silly illustration is if we had to eat the same kind of food morning, noon, and night, day in and day out, we'd get incredibly bored with it. Or another sillier example is if the world were made up of a bunch of folks just like me, Well, it's not a world that I would even want to be in. However, just putting a bunch of different people together with different thoughts, different backgrounds, different experiences, different perspectives, and say, now go make it work. Frankly, it won't work. To take the best advantage of diversity, it's going to take proactivity and it's going to take intentionality. So the first thing we need to do is seek to understand what makes that other person tick. And as I'm explaining this, I want you to think about it in the Masonic context. In the lodge, how we take a stranger and make him a brother. Now that's understanding is not going to just come by you passively sitting back and waiting for them to share what's most important to them. One of my 3 careers is that of a financial advisor. And basically, I get paid to be nosy. I love living vicariously through my clients and their children, learning what they do for careers, what they're studying in school, learning about their deepest hopes and their greatest fears. That is the reward to me, is gaining that understanding. So we have to proactively seek to understand people who are different from ourselves. From that point, we can get to where we accept one another for those differences. Now, if we stop here, I think we're only getting from darkness to a point of light and not to further enlightenment. Because you can liken this acceptance, if you will, to tolerance. You know, Joe, I know you're different than me, and I'll put up with it. But that is not truly taking advantage of the diversity. To do that, we need to get to the point where we appreciate one another for those differences. Think about the building of King Solomon's temple. 3 grand masters, 3,300 masters, overseers of the work. And then we have the fellow crafts, we have the entered apprentices. That stupendous edifice never would have been built if everybody was a leader. Or on the other hand, if everybody was a hewer in the mountains and the quarries. We needed all of those different talents, abilities, skills, and desires to do different work to create that. Same thing in society. And I think we oftentimes get ourselves in trouble in Masonry in assuming that everybody walks through our doors should become a leader, the master of the lodge. The lodge needs the workers every bit as much as it needs the master. Now, we've all been walking around our neighborhoods like crazy because of the pandemic. I can tell you every crack, every split sidewalk in my neighborhood. If you're walking along the sidewalk and you see a piece of broken glass or tile, what are you going to do with it? Well, you're either going to kick it off to the side or pick it up and put it in your pocket so nobody steps on it or no animal gets hurt by it. By itself, that piece of tile, that broken shard, is worth very little. I'm going to submit to you, each of us is that broken piece. By itself, we can accomplish so much. It's not until we put all of these pieces together that we have something unique, something special, something that could only be created by putting it all together. For those of you who have had the benefit of traveling to our Grand Lodge in California and San Francisco, the first thing you notice is this beautiful endo mosaic that tells the history of California Masonry. And whether you're seeing it during the morning when it's backlit from the sunlight or at night when it's backlit, it's just really, really spectacular. But when you get up close to it, you'll notice it's made up of pieces of glass and tile and dirt and leaves and seeds, things that you wouldn't even recognize on your walk. So I think that is a great example of the mosaic and how it fits together. President Jimmy Carter said it really well. We become not a melting pot, but a beautiful mosaic. Different people, different beliefs, different yearnings, different hopes, different dreams. And we need to honor that. And that to me is the beauty of diversity. Now, when I walk into a lodge, of course, we all, brand new lodge, we take it all in and we're looking for certain symbols and so on. There's one symbol that I look for in particular, and this is not required furniture in a California lodge. I don't know whether it is in New York, but it of course is the point within the circle. This symbol just means so much to me. Every time I see it in a lodge, it conjures up all kinds of meaning. I may have a little bit different take on it than you might. The point, of course, is said to represent us, the individual, who's always striving to improve, but has all these pressures of the world coming down on us and trying to yank and tug us in directions we don't want to go. You know, one of the things that I think Masonry teaches us is that we need to decide what kind of person we want to be and work to get there before we have those temptations yanking at us. I mentioned I'm a financial advisor. I can't decide not to steal from a client when that check with 2 commas comes in and they accidentally made it payable to Russ Charvonia. I have to decide, no, that is a zero tolerance policy I'm going to have before that temptation ever comes along. Well, the good news is Masons, we have lots of tools to help us to become that kind of person. And the first thing we're taught when we cross the threshold of a lodge is to take the compasses and circumscribe a circle around ourselves, which creates a boundary beyond which we're not to allow our passions or our prejudices to begin to intrude upon the rights or enjoyment of others. Now, if we had the benefit of being together, which I hope we will before too terribly long, I would actually come and walk up to somebody and get right in their face. Anyway, we would see them recoil. They would actually back away. That is a physical example of when my passions and prejudices have begun to intrude upon somebody else. Unfortunately, when we're not together, it's harder to read when we're doing that. And we need to, especially behind the anonymity of a keyboard, be ever more cognizant of that. And when we start to get into their space, we need to back off. Oh, now there may be times where we intentionally want to get in their space and make them uncomfortable, and that's okay. But make sure it's for the appropriate reason and that you're doing it to the appropriate extent. So that circle to me just means so much. And I try to keep it in my mind when I'm getting a weird feeling from somebody or somebody's reacting negatively to me. That's one of the first things I think is, did I just push my passions or my prejudices too far? By the way, is this telling us not to be passionate? No, not for a minute. Because without passion, nothing worthwhile would ever be accomplished. But we have to have that constant awareness. Now, that's a great symbol and helps us a lot, but this symbol has even more ways to help us. It has on its edges the 2 parallel perpendicular lines, which are said to represent what? Our patron saints of Masonry. In fact, we just celebrated one of them yesterday, I think. St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist. And when we see this symbol, it's supposed to conjure up their teachings, their morals. When I see this symbol, however, I also think about my Masonic mentors, the men who have and continued to guide me in my Masonic lifetime. Let me tell you a quick story about Worshipful Jack Joe of blessed memory. I became a Master Mason in May of 1992. I come home, my wife asks me, well, how was it? And I said, oh, it was incredible. And guess what, babe? What's that? I'm an officer. You see, the master had said, please sit in the junior steward seat. Well, my wife was the daughter of a Grand Master. And she says, do you have any idea what that means? And I said, none. She says, well, I do, and you're in deep trouble. From that night on, at the end of every meeting, Worshipful Jack would come up beside me, put his arm around me, and tell me what I had done wrong. Fast forward to a mere 3.5 years later, I'm master of my lodge. It's December, which means what? I have done my 12th stated meeting. And I am convinced that I finally got it right. I didn't forget to introduce the masters and past masters. I didn't forget the flag salute. I did everything, and I actually did it in order for once. Well, I was determined that I was going to get out of there before Jack could rain on my parade. I gavel the lodge closed, I remove my collar and my apron, and I make a beeline for the Tyler store. Well, for an older guy, Jack was pretty quick, because about the time I reached the altar, which in California is in the center of the lodge, not the east, here comes Jack, puts his arm around me. I have to tell you, my arm was cocked. I was ready to give it to him right in the gut. How dare you? Something fortunately stopped me, because I realized that while I thought I was at the pinnacle of my Masonic career, I'd done it all. Now I can sit on the ground, the sidelines, and have all the answers just like the other past masters do. Jack knew I had a lot more development, a whole lot more growing to do, and he didn't give up on me. Now think about this. I think all too often we are afraid to mentor people. Did anybody in that lodge room know what Jack was telling me? No. For all they knew, he was saying, let's go out for a cup of coffee. You see, what Worshipful Jack did so very well is he publicly praised me and others, and he privately admonished me of my errors, and gently gave me ways to reform my ways. Jack was always trying to make me a better person, a better Mason. When I see those two parallel perpendicular lines, he is one of my Masonic mentors that I think of frequently. We are each Masonic mentors. None of us is where we are today of our own volition. Each of us has had the benefit of standing on the shoulders of giants who have come before us. Who are we going to put on our shoulders? Remember, I asked you for 3 nuggets. You may have heard one by now. I encourage you to write it down. Now, there are 2 kinds of Masonry, 2 kinds of mentorship in my mind. The first is the intentional mentorship. And that's where somebody, typically a younger person, admires what you're typically in your career, in your field. And they will ask you if you will take them under your wings and teach them the trade. And you accept, and it's something that you really appreciate and strive to do well. The second type of mentorship is what I call the incidental or accidental mentorship. And this one's a little more dangerous. This is when you don't know that somebody is watching you. This is particularly important with our youth. If you want proof of, let me back it up. What do children learn more? What we tell them or what they witness? I promise you it's what they witness. And if you want proof of this, if you've ever had that young driver in your family, what have you been telling them all along? Never text and drive. And that message goes out the window as soon as they're in the car with you, you're driving, and they see you texting. Everything you told them is gone. So we need to be very aware, especially of young people, and what we are exhibiting. And asking ourselves constantly, is that the kind of language, the kind of behavior, the kind of attitude that I would want a young person emulating? And if not, maybe we have room for improvement. I hope this is resonating with you. Now, the symbol isn't complete, of course, until we surmount it with the volume of the sacred law. Because even with that lesson of keeping our passions and prejudices within due bounds, even with our Masonic and mentors and our patron saints of Masonry, we still need divine guidance to live the kind of life that we desire. And with all of that working for us, now we cannot materially err. Now, I'm talking about this in terms of Masonic content, but I want you to start thinking about this in your daily lives, when you're out with friends, when you're at work, when you're in your community. Is there anything wrong with saying to somebody, you know what? you might want to just create some boundaries beyond your power, your prejudices and passions, and keep in mind how that might be impacting somebody else. You know what? I'm going to treat you on the level here. There's nothing wrong with us using Masonic teachings and Masonic phrases with others. They don't even need to know that it's Masonic. The concepts work with whomever we are coming in contact. So much of what I want to share with you does not involve a reboot of who you are. When my wife and I were sitting at the dinner table and our daughter was 8 years old, our daughter said something profound, as they tend to do at that age. And I did this to my wife, Linda, and she said, "What's that all about?" And I said, "Our work here is done." She said, "What do you mean?" She is the person she's going to be. The rest of it is a little bit of polish, if you will. But we become the person we are by the time we are 8 years old. So I can't expect us to totally change who we are. Besides, you're a good person who you are. What I do want us to do is be ever more cognizant of little things that we can change that may have dramatic impact on our relationships. This is one such example. Have you ever been in that conversation with somebody and you're exhilarated, you're so excited about what you're sharing with them, and they say yes, and for that split moment, you're elated, they're agreeing with me. And then here it comes, comma, but. And subconsciously, you may not even realize this is happening. You put up a shield. Oh my goodness, here it comes. Now they're going to knock me down. That may not be what they're going to do, by the way, but that's how we are programmed. When we do that to others, that's how they are going to react. A simple change of that 3-letter word to yes and will change your entire conversation. Yes, and did you also think about this, Bob? Now we're building on the conversation. And after all, as Masons, isn't that what we are as builders? Try this. I promise it will change your relationships. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, well, incivility is all because of social media, that was the death knell to society. I agree that it's been a major problem, but I'm not willing to blame all of this incivility on social media. And in fact, I'm going to suggest that social media is a two-edged instrument, not unlike the master's gavel. When we invest it with him, we admonish him that this may be an instrument used for great good or greater evil, and to use it judiciously. Think about the butcher knife in your kitchen. It can be used to help prepare your meals for your sustenance, or it can be used to maim or kill somebody. How many of you have reconnected with a long-lost friend or family member because of social media? But for social media, you probably would never have connected. Yet we've seen the ugliness of the cyberbullying and the suicides and the other ugliness that comes from social media. Now, I'm probably Facebook friends with some of you. I know I am with Pete on Facebook. And you may notice that occasionally I'll put a pretty provocative statement in there. And I'm doing this for 2 reasons. One is I legitimately want to hear other perspectives, because I'm so set in my way that I do want to try to understand the other side of it. But I'll also do it to provide an example of how to address a difficult subject in a civil manner. And I've had many people come back to me privately and say, I really admire how you handled that. And by the way, I didn't come up with this stuff. I've just garnered these tools from others. When I'm experiencing a conversation that is involving Masons online, going off the rails and veering into an uncivil path, I will oftentimes do hashtag Masons for Civility, or hashtag Excelsior, Scottish Rite for Civility, or DMLA, whatever the case is. And this is doing one of two things. It's either quieting the conversation, getting it back on track, or they're unfriending me and taking the conversation elsewhere. In either case, I'm okay with it. So you might just try this when you're encountering that kind of situation. So many of our problems are because it is so important for us, to be right, especially with a spouse or a child. The poet Murakami said, always remember that to argue and win is to break down the reality of the person against whom you are arguing. It is painful to lose your reality, so be kind, even if you are right. Think about this. We draw lines in the sand beyond which we cannot pass. If we are later proven to be wrong, don't we want somebody, that other person, to give us the grace to truly be wrong? To be able to admit it without losing all face? When we have harmed somebody, it is critical that we not only own it, but we then go the next step and truly apologize. And I don't mean a fake apology. Well, Matt, I'm sorry you interpreted it that way. I mean a legitimate apology. And then we need to go one further step. In the Jewish religion, during the Day of Atonement is Yom Kippur. And the word that they use during that is teshuvah, which literally means to return. It means to return the relationship back to the good state that it was in before your actions harmed it. And so when we have harmed somebody, we need to go that extra mile to first legitimately apologize, but then figure out what we can do to make it right. And that doesn't necessarily mean asking them, well, Richard, what can I do to make this right? It means you figuring it out. I'm going to give you a quick example of this, and I don't want to sound holier than thou because it is not at all that. But our lodge consolidated with another lodge, and a past master from that lodge came in, and he, in my mind, just thought he was all that. He was an egotistical son of a gun. And I judged him right then and there as something that I didn't want to have anything to do with. Well, after a few months of being around him, I saw how he interacted, particularly with the newer, younger Masons. And I felt like a complete idiot. I had completely misjudged this man. And it was nagging at me for days. And I can tell you exactly where I was on the 101 freeway, because I pick up the phone, I call him, I said, Worshipful, I owe you an apology. This fellow's from the South. He says, what? You ain't done me no wrong. I said, oh, I most certainly did. He said, well, what'd you do? I said, I misjudged you. And for that, I'm profoundly sorry. But I didn't know it. You're right. But guess what? It changed how I was interacting with you. It was impacting you. And I'll tell you, my heart was beating as I was picking up the phone to call him. I didn't know how he was going to take it. And we have a fantastic relationship right now. Something else about being right. I'm going to suggest to you that all too often what we consider to be an absolute truth is not, and in fact is merely a deeply held personal belief. Think about this. Once upon a time, it was an absolute truth that the earth was flat. Guess what? Well, all right, for some people, I guess it still is. What season are we in right now? Well, it's an absolute truth. It's winter, isn't it? What if you're in Australia, South Africa? I'm sorry, their absolute truth is it is summer. So let's be careful when we project something as being an absolute truth. And I may well ruffle some feathers here, but I'm going to suggest that to many of us, our religious beliefs have become the absolute truth. So much so that we think that everybody has to think the same way. My personal belief is none of us know what that absolute truth is at this stage in our lives. Maybe it will come to us at some point. Just having that understanding of, I truly believe this to be the case, but it's not a universal absolute truth, will again change how we interact with others. Dissent. We oftentimes try to squelch dissent. The problem child, if you will, the curmudgeon, there's another word, the gadfly. I think we need to get to the point where we honor dissent. And if you think about it, Masonry is designed to do that. Let's embrace it. Let's encourage it. And when I lead an organization and I get a sense that there is any kind of dissent, instead of rushing and calling for the vote, I will give extra airtime to the person who's got that nagging feeling in their gut about the decision we are about to make. Because more often than not, they are seeing something that the rest of the group is missing. And by getting that out onto the table, we oftentimes make far better decisions. It keeps us out of trouble. So don't squash it, but rather embrace and encourage it. It'll open your eyes up to those potential blind spots. All righty, let me talk to you briefly about the 3 Ds of communication. The first D is debate. And if you've ever been on a debate team, you know that your sole objective is to win. And when you have a winner, you have a loser. And when you are in a debate, there are certain ground rules you need to follow, because the minute you don't, you are as good as gone, as good as lost. One of those is you can never, ever change your stance. Well, Myron, you know what? That's a really good thought. I had never considered that. Boy, as soon as I've done that, I have just lost the debate. And I think we can see the times and places where debate makes sense. By the way, our political on TV debates are not true debates. They are reality TV. And if you want proof of this, all too soon, they're going to be present again in our lives. Turn on a debate, close your eyes, listen to the question the moderator has asked, and then listen to the answer that the candidate has delivered, and it's going to be night and day. Well, what do you think we ought to do about immigration? Well, what we need to do about taxes is, those are not true debates. Second D, deliberation. Deliberation is where we have a problem, a complex problem, and the answer is not immediately apparent. So we're going to gather together the people with the expertise, the education, the understanding, the experience of this. Pardon me, they're going to come together. First thing they're going to do is really brainstorm what the problem is, because often what we think it is up here isn't the root of it down here. And then they're going to come up with different potential solutions and try to anticipate the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. And to the best of their ability, what the potential unintended consequences of each of these solutions might be. I'll give you an example. Congress, of course, awarded extra money for people to stay home at the beginning of the pandemic, and it worked. But there was a lot of thought afterwards that it was keeping them staying home when it was safe for them to come back. That certainly wasn't an intended consequence of Congress, but they implemented it without that sufficient deliberation that they didn't consider that. At least that's my take on it. The sole purpose of deliberation is to figure out what the best solution is, to reach a consensus as a group, and to go forth with that direction. Now, consensus, of course, does not mean unanimous, but it does mean that the group decides that that is the voice with which we will speak. Think about it. This is our lodge, isn't it? This is how each of our Masonic lodges should be making decisions. And it is designed to breed that other kind, that dissent, if you will. I want to back myself up a minute here. Think for a moment about how our lodges are situated. You have brethren on the south, you have brethren on the north, in the north, you have the master in the east, and you've got sometimes 20, 30, 40 feet separating the brethren from the north and the south. It would be really easy to throw barbs at that idiot in the north, I'm sorry, that brother in the north, because he doesn't know what he's talking about. And yet that rarely happens inside a lodge. I'm not going to say never, because I've seen it happen, unfortunately. Why is that? Because that brother in the South can't talk to that brother in the North without what? First going through the master in the East. And that master wields his gavel. And because we're all Pavlov, he knows that if he raps it once, you will sit down. And if you don't, he will have you retired from the lodge. So I think the solution to society's ills is for all of us walk around with our gavels and say, you're out of line, you're out of line, you're out of line, and that'll take care of everything. I don't know, let's try it tomorrow. My point of it is one of the reasons Masonry works and is able to be a civil society in and of itself is because we have all agreed to abide by those certain rules of decorum. And when they break down is when we end up in trouble. Third D, dialogue. What is dialogue? Dialogue in its simplest form is speaking and hearing. It is not about winning like a debate. It is not about finding solutions like a deliberation. It is merely about speaking and hearing. Well, gosh, if it's not about winning or finding answers, why in the world waste your time with it? Because dialogue can lead to greater understanding, great growth, seeing different perspectives. And sometimes, frankly, we just need to be heard. Have you ever been with somebody you just want to take them by the shoulders and shake them and say, you are not hearing me? Sometimes we just need to be heard. By the way, try this with your spouse, try this with your children. When they come to you complaining about something and you go into fix-it mode, as we're all want to do, stop for a second. Do you want me to try to fix this for you? Or do you want me to just listen? More often than not, going to say, for crying out loud, once, would you just listen? And frankly, that takes a lot of burden off of your shoulders, doesn't it? Now, dialogue is easy when we're seeing eye to eye. In fact, I'll submit to you that we don't need civility when we're getting along famously. We need it when we are engaged in a difficult conversation. That's when we need to have the tools in place and have practiced it enough so that we react in the proper way. Remember what I said about we can't decide what kind of person to be before, at the time of temptation. We have to decide it long before. Same thing with this. We can't decide how to engage in that difficult conversation in the heat of the moment. We have to have practiced it and gained those skills well in advance. There's a group out of Arizona State University, the Hugh Downs School of Human Communication, that developed civil dialogue. They've trademarked it with the tagline, hot topics, cool heads. And the way it works is you take a statement that when people hear it or read it, the hair gets up on the back of their necks. And you have 5 chairs seated down in the middle in the shape of a horseshoe. And they're pretty close together and strongly agree all the way to strongly disagree. And the facilitator reads a statement. Notice this isn't a question, but it's a statement. So I have a couple of them here as an example. The Electoral College in its current state should be abandoned. And you can imagine how when people hear this, oh yes, it's letting the smaller states dictate, who ends up being our president. Somebody can win the popular vote and lose the election, or no, it's very critical that our 2 big coasts not decide who is our president each and every year. And you can see people would strongly agree or strongly disagree with this. Another one is, it would be appropriate for Freemasonry to sponsor a youth order that's open to people of all genders. Boy, can you imagine that? Oh, wait, Russ, what do you mean by people of all genders? There's female, there's male. No. DeMolay needs to be with boys, Jobs and Rainbow need to be with girls and so on. There's other times for them to be co-ed. So the way this works is the facilitator shares some background about the statement, factual background, and then asks for people to take one of those 5 seats. It's interesting, when I do this with young people, I have to admonish them. No running, listen to the rule, the statement before you take it, and 1 butt per seat, because they're so energetic to do it. Adults are a little more held back, if you will. And so it takes 1 to break the ice, but they all eventually fill it. And then once I have my participants there, I share with them the ground rules of civility. And these work in any kind of conversation you're having, be it this more formal setting, be it one-on-one or larger groups. And again, if you're looking for those nuggets, you might find one or two of them here. First of all, be passionate. As I said earlier, nothing worthwhile would be accomplished without passion, but we need to do it without becoming hostile. And one way we do that is focus on how the statement is making you feel. Talk about your feelings, and that helps to temper your passions to some degree. Use truthful speech, but not attacking. And a way we do that is by using I language. I feel, I think, I believe, as opposed to you language. Well, Robert, you think. How do I know what Robert thinks? The only point of truth from which I can speak is my own perspective. And this is one of those little changes you can start to build into your conversations that will make things so much better. It's not attacking. Well, I think that this is a much better way to go. First of all, you just want to ruin everything for everybody. Disagree, but do it without demonizing the other. We can agree to disagree on this. It doesn't make you a horrible person. Engage in active listening, and this has got to be the hardest thing in the world for me. It means truly being in tune to what the person is saying and show them that you're listening. And you do that by the occasional nod, by making the eye contact. You do it with your body language by leaning in. You also do the opposite by folding your arms. What am I doing here? I'm shutting the conversation down. I'm better than you. I know it all. I'm not hearing you anymore. I do that because my back is sore, frankly, but I have to be aware of it and force myself not to fold my arms. Here's the hardest part I have with active listening. We cannot allow our minds to start to formulate our response while the other person's still talking. Why not? Because the human brain is capable of doing exactly one thing at a time. This whole bit about we can multitask is nonsense. I have found myself when I'm talking to my children or my wife and I'm looking at the computer, I've got to close the lid on the computer and look at them to hear them. I've had complete conversations with my wife where a day later she says, well, this is what we're doing. I said, why didn't you tell me that? We did. You said, okay. And I have no recollection of it. The problem with not allowing ourselves to formulate our response while the other person's talking is we may forget what we were going to say. To which I say, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it wasn't that important in the first place, or you would have remembered it. Don't engage in that fake listening. And then something else that we can do that changes conversations. We're in a conversation with somebody. One way we can show them we heard them is to reframe what we think we heard them say. Well, Rick, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is, and that does two things. Number one, it clearly tells him that I am hearing him, listening to him. But more importantly, it's giving Rick a chance to say, well, you're close, Russ, but you missed this part of it. How many times have we had that knockdown, drag out argument with somebody, only hours later, days later, or years later to figure out it was over a silly, stupid misunderstanding? Wouldn't it have been nice to identify that misunderstanding early on, clear it up, and preserve the relationship? Reframing will do that. Practice it, try it. By the way, this doesn't mean mimicking back what you think they heard, but really internalizing it. It will change your conversations. And the last part of what makes this process work is the facilitator has identified an information source, somebody in the audience with their cell phone and Wi-Fi handy. And it's amazing how this changes how the participants talk. If one of the participants states something as fact that somebody else says, you know what, I'm not so sure about that. That line of conversation stops until the information source can prove or disprove it. Just the mere knowledge that that person is there changes how we talk. Instead of saying, well, we all know that 86.7% of all people make up statistics on the spot, we'll say, you know, it's my understanding that most people make up statistics on the spot. And it keeps you from drawing that line in the sand beyond which you cannot retrench. So the way this works is we do the exercise, and then the facilitator shares what they learned, opens it up to the audience, and it is an amazing, amazing experience. So what I'd like all of you to do is think about your communities. I used to use the example of Charlottesville, Virginia. You know, that didn't just bubble up overnight and turn into the mass demonstration and a woman losing her life. That was boiling under the surface for months and I believe years before. Could we as Masons, recognizing that in our own community, that realize that this community is having a strong disagreement over whether to remove the statues of Confederate soldiers from the town center? Could we have set some of these civil dialogue exercises up in our lodges and or our libraries and invited the public in and engaged in this civil dialogue exercise, not to change anybody's minds, but to teach them how they can engage in fruitful civil discourse with one another? So what I ask of each of you is to keep your ear to the ground for what might be bubbling up under the surface. And if you're recognizing something like that, contact us and let's discuss whether this might be an appropriate technique to try to use. Fair? Can I take 15 more minutes? Okay, then I'm going to give you a bonus here. We created in California something we're calling Solomon's Wheel. We took the 3 principal tenets of Freemasonry, the 4 cardinal virtues. We draw out tape using painter's tape or something like that on the floor. Don't do it on wood floor if it's going to mess it up. And we print out these and laminate these words or statements, and we just randomly throw them in each piece of the pie. 3 principal tenets, 4 cardinal virtues, that's 7. If you do this properly, there's 8 spokes, there's 8 wedges there. So one of them is naturally blank. You do this with a group of people. You have them come and stand in the wheel. Wherever they're standing, you have them contemplate what that is saying to them at this moment. And that blank can be whatever it means to them at that moment. And then you have them walk and stand in each wedge of the pie. And just contemplate what it means. Yeah, a lot of people make sure they're going the same direction like salmon so they don't run into each other. Then you ask them to go and stand in the part that speaks to them the most right now. Then you ask them to act it out with the other people in their wedge without using their words. Any idea why not to use their words? We can all issue the Webster's dictionary definition of these words. When you act it out, it internalizes it more. And it creates a bond with the other people. It's amazing. Now, this whole exercise, we need to have agreement among everybody that what happens in Solomon's Wheel stays there. Because we have seen people really get emotional with this next aspect. And that is, you then ask them to go and stand in the part where they think they need the most work. They want to improve, grow the most. By the way, I did this with the ladies of Washington State a few years ago, and they were playing Twister. They figured out how they could cover all of, more of the spaces. Guys, we get in one space. That's all we can handle. One of them just stood in the hub of the spoke. I have seen people repair relationships with others in this part of the exercise. I've seen people break down in tears. It's had that kind of power. Let me share with you how I use it. I have a version of this on my desk. And when I am facing a dilemma where the solution is not immediately clear to me, I will close my eyes and mentally walk Solomon's Wheel. And I may take just a few seconds. I don't know. I may be taking a few minutes. It's a form of meditating, I guess. And I'll tell you, after doing that, the solution tends to become evident to me. One more way we can take the teachings of Freemasonry and help us to make better decisions, help us to be that kind of person. So you have my permission to use this to ask me more questions about it down the road. What do you think of this logo? Pretty cool, huh? A brother Mason out of British Columbia made this and presented it to me, and I just, wow, it says so much. We have formed the Worldwide Civility Council. It's a nonprofit organization, and it is the umbrella organization of all of these efforts of ours. This started with the Masonic Family Civility Project that kind of has been an incubator to all of this. We created the Civility Scorecard, all of this stuff. In fact, I've got to add civility ambassadors to this. I forgot to do that. Your go-to place is MasonicCivility.org. Make note of that, check it out. Resources galore are there for you. PowerPoint presentations such as this for inside Masonry, for outside, for your Chamber of Commerce, your civic group, Kiwanis, Lions, or whatever. You can download these PowerPoints, edit them to your heart's content. None of them are protected. The idea here is you don't have to create anything from scratch. You can take what we have. There's trestle board articles. There's all kinds of different things there. And if you find a resource you think ought to be a part of this repository, you can add it there. If we think it's valuable, we will add it to the resources here. So MasonicCivility.org, info@ is how you can reach me or my team. The Civility Scorecard. We developed this, 6 years or so ago. Longer than that. But my idea is I wanted to be able to tell the relative levels of civility in people's speeches. And so we researched this like crazy. We took Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, and all kinds of different people, and we figured out what made it more or less civil. And we've just gone through a complete rebuild of it. And very soon, right now you have to copy text to speech in there. Pretty soon it's going to be in almost real-time audio, and we'll be able to convert it. My goal for this is that when the candidates are debating and telling us what they want to do to us and for us, we can see their relative level of civility on the crawl underneath. So I'm working to get it there. But this is a great tool for future Grand Masters. If you want an idea as to how your speech might resonate, you can paste it in there and see, and then you can play with it and see if you can improve the score. We have the community, the civility shop. We're past Christmas time, but there's still some really cool swag there. The net profit from it, if you will, is part of how we do this effort. So I encourage you to go civilityshop.org and see if there's not some stuff that you might want to partake of. We had the first Urgency of Civility conference in Alexandria, Virginia at the George Washington Masonic National Memorial in May of 2019. It was incredibly productive. I'll share with you something that came out of it in a moment. We held one in May of this year. That one was entirely virtual. It also was very effective and productive, but not nearly as much so as if it were in person. You can put this in your calendar, and it's a short jaunt for you, obviously, but May 21 to 23 of 2023 is going to be our next one back at the Washington Masonic Memorial. So we hope you'll plan to join us for that. As I said, what came out of the 2019 one was, wouldn't it be cool if we created some accountability? And if somebody knew that by dealing with me, they were dealing with somebody that was committed to treating them in a dignified civil manner. And so we created what we're calling certified civil designation. Those of us that are older, remember we'd buy a piece of electronics and we'd look underneath for the UL, Underwriter's Laboratory seal, and that meant it was safe, or the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. We want this to become so ubiquitous that it's subconscious, that you're seeing it on my website of my law firm or my financial planning firm, or you're seeing it on my social media. And you know, okay, this is somebody that cares about my relationship with them. And the way this works is, if somebody with whom you're dealing feels that you weren't civil with them, somebody, say in my law firm, a client or whatever, they can file a civility concern, not a complaint, but a concern with the Worldwide Civility Council. And they will then come to Russ and say, you know what, this is how Rick felt that you didn't treat him as he should have been. And here are some ways that you can change that going forward. So the idea isn't to wrap the knuckles and tell them don't do it again, but rather a more grassroots improvement. And some people have told me I'm nuts for this next thought, but I really think we need to get there, which is where the next time Mark Zuckerberg, right, maybe not the next time, but 10 times from now, that he's testifying before Congress and saying, yes, Congresswoman, yes, Congressman, I know we still have trouble, but 35% of our people are now certified civil, and it has lowered the temperature of our platform. I want to get there. I think this is going to make a difference. When we started this effort 8 years ago, we were trying to get our leaders to be more civil, top-down approach. And after a couple of years of futility, we realized it needs to be more ground up. And this is one way we'll do that. All right, I can't do this without a cheap, shameless plug. This book has been 6 years in the making. It wouldn't have happened unless I teamed up with fellow Mason Michael Ashley. And I got to tell you, it was just a joy working with him on it. I'm proud of this work, and I hope if you choose to read it, that you get as much out of it as we have intended for it. It is designed to make you uncomfortable. It will tick off absolutely everybody that reads it at least one point or another. But that's by design, because it's only when we get in those states of discomfort, that we're able to be susceptible to change. And in fact, at the end of each chapter, there is an exercise that you can either, there's space in the book if you're so inclined to ruin a perfectly good book, or you can take your tablet or your phone and scan the QR code, or you can go to the website and you can write your responses to it. You can keep those anonymous or you can share them with us. And it's designed to take you on a civility journey. It's designed at the end of it for you to know exactly what you can do to be closer and closer to that more perfect Ashley. Trust me, I've read it 6 times. I'm so tired of it. But I hope that if you do decide to read it, you'll enjoy it. So what can we do? Again, we've invested an hour and a half together. There's, I don't know, 40 of us. That's a lot of investment. This has to have been valuable. First thing I suggest that we each need to do is examine our own behavior. Each of us has ways that we can improve. You know, we often talk about, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase this. It seems that the people we profess to love the most, our families, are often the ones we treat the poorest. And I've asked myself, why is that? And all I can figure out is it's safe. We know that they're going to love us unconditionally. They're going to be there for us. But we got to flip that on its table and make sure we save some energy to be able to be civil to our own families, for crying out loud. Go to MasonicCivility.org, lots of great resources. Look for opportunities to promote this both in your lodges, your jurisdiction, in your community. Become a civility ambassador. We have a network of ambassadors, Masonic, and then we're building one of community ambassadors across the globe. And the idea here is these are people on the ground, know what's going on in their community. They have their ear to the ground. They can bring us in to try to prevent problems such as Charlottesville or so many others from cropping up. Look for ways to support our efforts, if you will, through the Worldwide Civility Council and the shop. Put that May of 2023 in your calendar and join us. We have podcast and YouTube channels. If you just Google Worldwide Civility, you can subscribe to them. And consider celebrating a day without politics on October 20th of each year. Just kind of a mental palate cleaner, a mental cleanser to not talk about politics for one whole day. I've tried it. It's really, really tough. There's one more thing I'm going to share with you, and then I'll wrap it up. Think about a man entering, wanting to join our beloved fraternity. He has to complete an application, and he has to profess a belief in a supreme being. I want to focus on two parts of that for a moment. Do we ask him to prove his belief in a supreme being? No. All he has to do is profess it to us. You see, we are taking this man who we may not know at all, or not well at least, for his word. Why is this so important? We, by being human, haven't ingrained in us to size people up in a moment's notice. Somebody's walking through the door where you are, you're deciding whether you run to them with open arms or do you hit the deck because they're danger. We size them up based on how they look, their color, their skin, their male, female, all kinds of different things. I want us to flip that on its head like we have done in Masonry, where we presume each person with whom we are coming in contact is a decent person. Has there ever been an atheist made a Mason? Yes. We've blown it on occasion. But we as a craft have decided we would rather trust them for their word and be proven wrong on occasion than distrust everybody and be proven wrong all the time. So presume decency in people with whom you come across, even our elected officials, even the person who is going about things in an entirely different way than we think is right. Give them that benefit. I want to come back to that. We ask them to profess a belief in a supreme being. Does it need to be my supreme being? No. In fact, we are stronger because we have men who have different beliefs in that. We capitalize on that. We embrace it. Let's really appreciate that. Civility or else, that seems to be the sign of the times. The instability is like water. It's going to take the path of least resistance. It's going to take effort to turn this around, to get our young people especially to know that this isn't the way it needs to be. It isn't the way it should be. But we need to do this now. My greatest fear is that this is becoming so much a part of our moral fabric, so much a part of who we are, that our children and our children's children are learning it, that we're not even going to be able to turn it around in a generation. I've had people tell me periods of civility and instability are purely cyclical. If we just wait it out, it will come back. To which I have two questions. Number one, what is wrong with us shortening this negative period if we can? And number two, what if they're wrong? What if this is who we become? My brethren, we each have the power to turn this around. I ask each of you to determine tonight to become that proverbial stone, to be dropped into the placid waters of complacency, and let your actions and your words create ripples to the far shores.
Thanks for spending time with XLCR 32. The experiences, comments, opinions, and views shared on this program are those of individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, Concordant, or Pendant body. Until we meet again, keep on reaching higher.